The unsolved vanishing of the Italian ghost train. In 1911, 106 people boarded a train in Italy. It entered a tunnel and was never seen again. No wreckage, no bodies, just gone. This is the most terrifying mystery you've never heard of. A train full of passengers vanished inside a mountain tunnel in 1911. 2 years later, survivors appeared 6,000 miles away in Mexico, claiming they'd traveled through time. The truth is even stranger than you think. What happened when an entire train with 106 souls entered a tunnel and literally disappeared from existence? The Italian ghost train mystery has baffled investigators for 113 years, and the evidence will make your blood run cold. They searched the tunnel 24 times. They found nothing, not a single trace of the train, the passengers, or any wreckage. This 1911 disappearance is proof that some mysteries were never meant to be solved. A white mist swallowed the train whole. Witnesses heard 3 desperate whistle blows, then silence. When investigators entered the tunnel 30 minutes later, over 100 people had vanished into thin air. This is the Italian ghost train incident.
Our story begins on July 14, 1911, in Rome, Italy. It was the height of summer, and the Italian railway system was bustling with travelers, heading to the coast, to the mountains, and everywhere in between. The day started like any other at Rome's central station, with the usual chaos of departures, arrivals, and the symphony of steam whistles filling the air. Among the scheduled departures was a regional train that would make history for all the wrong reasons. This particular locomotive was carrying approximately 106 passengers, though some accounts put the number as high as 110. The passengers were a typical mix of Italian society: families heading on vacation, businessmen traveling for work, young couples seeking adventure, and elderly travelers visiting relatives. What made this journey particularly special was that it included a group of wealthy tourists and dignitaries who had specifically chartered part of the train to tour the Italian countryside. These weren't just ordinary travelers. These were people whose disappearance would send shockwaves through European high society. The train's scheduled route would take it north through the picturesque Apennine Mountains, passing through numerous tunnels carved through the ancient rock. The conductor that day was a man named Zanetti, a veteran railway employee with over 15 years of experience. By all accounts, he was meticulous, professional, and had never had a single incident on his record. The train's engineer was equally experienced, and the locomotive itself had been inspected just days before and found to be in perfect working condition. As the train pulled out of the station at approximately 11:47 a.m., nobody could have predicted that within hours it would become the center of one of history's most enduring mysteries. Witnesses on the platform later reported that the departure was completely routine. There were no mechanical issues, no signs of distress, nothing out of the ordinary whatsoever. The train simply chugged out of the station and disappeared into the Italian countryside, as thousands of trains had done before it. Now here's where things get absolutely chilling. About 2 hours into the journey, the train approached a tunnel in the mountains. This wasn't just any tunnel. It was over a mile long, cutting straight through a massive ridge of solid limestone. The tunnel had been completed just a few years earlier and was considered an engineering marvel of its time. According to the most widely circulated account, as the train entered the tunnel, witnesses standing near the entrance reported seeing a strange white mist or fog beginning to form at the tunnel's mouth. This was particularly odd because the weather that day was reported to be clear and sunny, with no atmospheric conditions that would explain such a phenomenon. What happened next has been described differently by various sources, but the core details remain consistent and deeply disturbing. The witnesses claimed that as the train entered deeper into the tunnel, the white mist seemed to grow thicker and more opaque, almost as if it were swallowing the train whole. Some described it as having an unnatural quality, moving in ways that ordinary fog simply doesn't move, swirling in patterns that seemed almost purposeful. One witness, a local farmer named Giuseppe Ricci, who was tending his fields near the tunnel entrance, later gave a statement to investigators. He claimed he heard the train's whistle blow 3 times in rapid succession, a signal that something was wrong. The sound, he said, became increasingly muffled and distorted, as if the train were moving away at an impossible speed, or as if the sound itself were being absorbed by something. Then, silence. Complete and absolute silence. The rhythmic chug of the steam engine, the clickety-clack of wheels on rails, the whistle, all of it simply stopped. Ricci said the silence was so profound and so sudden that it felt wrong, like nature itself was holding its breath. And the white mist? Within minutes of the train entering the tunnel, it began to dissipate, leaving no trace that it had ever been there.
Here's what makes this truly terrifying. When concerned railway workers entered the tunnel from the opposite end approximately 30 minutes later, they found nothing. The tunnel was completely empty. No train, no passengers, no debris, nothing. The rails showed no signs of damage or disturbance. It was as if over 100 people and a multi-ton locomotive had simply evaporated into thin air. As you can imagine, when word reached railway officials that an entire train had vanished, panic ensued. This wasn't just a matter of a delayed train or a minor derailment. This was the complete disappearance of over 100 human beings and a massive piece of machinery. Within hours, Italian authorities launched what would become one of the most extensive search operations in the country's history up to that point. Teams of investigators, railway experts, and even military personnel were dispatched to the tunnel and the surrounding area. They had one objective: find that train. The tunnel was searched not once, not twice, but dozens of times over the following weeks. Every inch of track was inspected. Engineers checked for any possible cave-ins, hidden chambers, or structural failures that could explain where the train had gone. They brought in surveying equipment to map the tunnel and ensure there were no overlooked side passages or openings. The result? Nothing. The tunnel was solid, intact, and completely empty. Search parties scoured the mountainside above and around the tunnel. They looked for any sign of the train having somehow derailed and crashed down the slopes. They checked every ravine, every cliff face, every possible location where wreckage might have ended up. Mountain guides who knew the terrain intimately were brought in to check even the most inaccessible areas. Again, nothing. Not a single piece of debris, not a scrap of metal, not even a personal belonging from any of the passengers. The railway company was desperate for answers. This wasn't just a human tragedy. This was a potential disaster for public confidence in rail travel. How could anyone feel safe boarding a train when another train carrying over 100 people had simply vanished? They offered substantial rewards for any information, any clue, anything that could help explain what had happened.
Investigators interviewed every possible witness. They tracked down people who had been near the railway line that day: farmers working in fields, travelers on nearby roads, residents of small villages in the area. They compiled hundreds of witness statements. While many people had seen the train pass by earlier in its journey, nobody had seen it emerge from the other side of the tunnel. It was as if the tunnel had become some kind of doorway to nowhere, swallowing the train and its passengers into oblivion. Perhaps most frustratingly, investigators found that the track beyond the tunnel was completely undisturbed. If the train had somehow passed through the tunnel, it would have left signs: compressed gravel, disturbed ballast, heat marks on the rails. There was nothing. The rails beyond the tunnel looked as if no train had passed over them in days. One particularly interesting detail emerged during the investigation. Several witnesses near the tunnel entrance reported hearing strange sounds in the hours following the disappearance. They described it as a distant rumbling, almost like thunder,
but coming from inside the mountain rather than the sky. Some reported hearing what sounded like muffled screams or shouts, though these sounds were so faint and distorted that witnesses couldn't be certain they weren't imagining them. When investigators explored the tunnel in response to these reports, they found nothing and heard nothing unusual.
Now, just when you think this mystery couldn't get any stranger, buckle up, because here's where things take a turn into the absolutely bizarre. According to some versions of the story, 2 years after the disappearance in 1913, a shocking claim emerged from Mexico. A small group of people, reportedly disoriented and suffering from severe psychological trauma, appeared near Mexico City. These individuals claimed to be survivors from the missing Italian train. The story goes that these survivors had somehow emerged from a tunnel in Mexico, thousands of miles from where they had vanished, with no memory of how they had gotten there. They described experiencing a strange white mist, a sensation of being pulled or moved at incredible speeds, and then finding themselves in a completely different location. Most disturbingly, they claimed that when they emerged, they had aged significantly. Some appeared to have aged several years in what felt like only hours to them. Mexican authorities supposedly examined these individuals and found their story credible enough to report to Italian officials. However, when Italian investigators attempted to verify the claims and interview the survivors, things became murky. Some accounts say the survivors were committed to mental institutions, deemed insane by doctors who couldn't accept their story. Others claim they simply disappeared again before formal investigations could be completed. Adding another layer to the Mexican connection, there were reports that in the years following 1913, small groups of elderly, confused individuals would occasionally appear in various locations across Mexico and even parts of the southern United States, claiming to be from the lost Italian train. These people would describe the same experience: the white mist, the tunnel, the sensation of time passing differently, but their stories were almost always dismissed as the ramblings of mentally unstable individuals. One particularly detailed account from 1917 describes an elderly woman who appeared at a hospital in Veracruz, Mexico, speaking Italian and carrying what appeared to be authentic Italian documents from 1911. She told doctors she had been on a train in Italy and had somehow ended up in Mexico. She wore clothing that, according to the hospital records, was consistent with Italian fashion from the early 19-teens, though significantly aged and worn. The woman died a few weeks later, and with her death went any chance of verifying her extraordinary story. But here's what makes the Mexican connection so controversial. There's very little hard documentation to support these claims. No official Mexican government records from that era definitively confirm the appearance of traumatized Italian train passengers. No photographs exist of these supposed survivors. No verified documentation from Italian authorities acknowledges the Mexican reports as legitimate. This has led many researchers to question whether the Mexican connection was ever real, or if it was a later embellishment added to an already strange story. Some suggest it may have been inspired by early science fiction stories popular at the time, which often featured themes of teleportation and time displacement. Others argue that the lack of documentation doesn't necessarily mean it didn't happen. Record-keeping in remote areas of Mexico in the early 20th century was far from perfect, and it's possible that important documents were simply lost or never properly filed. So what actually happened to the Zanetti ghost train? Over the past century, researchers, paranormal investigators, scientists, and conspiracy theorists have proposed numerous explanations. Let's break down the main theories. Theory number 1. The mundane explanation. Some skeptics argued that the entire story is either exaggerated or completely fabricated. They point to the lack of contemporary newspaper reports, missing official documentation, and the absence of verifiable records from Italian railway authorities. According to this theory, perhaps a train did have an accident in a tunnel, but the details were either covered up or became embellished over time through retellings. The problem with this theory?
If it were a simple cover-up, why hasn't any documentation leaked in over 100 years? And how do we explain the multiple witness accounts of the strange mist and the train's complete disappearance? Theory number 2. The natural disaster. Another explanation suggests a catastrophic cave-in or earthquake buried the train deep within the mountain. Proponents of this theory argue that the geological forces could have been so powerful that the train and all its passengers were crushed and buried under tons of rock, with the tunnel then reforming or being covered over, hiding all evidence. The problem? The tunnel was extensively surveyed and showed no signs of major geological disturbance. Additionally, an earthquake or cave-in of that magnitude would have been felt throughout the region, and there are no reports of seismic activity that day. Theory number 3. The paranormal portal. This is where things get really interesting. Some researchers believe the tunnel became, however briefly, some kind of doorway to another dimension or time period. The white mist that witnesses described could have been a visible manifestation of this phenomenon. This would explain both the complete disappearance and, if you believe it, the Mexican connection. Perhaps the train and its passengers were transported through space and time, emerging in a different location and era. Supporters of this theory point to other alleged cases of mysterious disappearances in tunnels and enclosed spaces throughout history. Theory number 4. The time slip. Related to the paranormal portal theory is the concept of a time slip, a temporary rupture in the normal flow of time. According to this theory, the train and its passengers didn't move through space, but through time. They could have been displaced forward or backward in time, potentially explaining why they were never found in their original time period. Some versions of this theory suggest the passengers might have emerged at different points in history, which could account for scattered reports of confused Italian-speaking individuals appearing in strange locations over subsequent decades. Theory number 5. The government cover-up. Conspiracy theorists have long suggested that the disappearance was somehow related to a secret government or military experiment. Perhaps the tunnel was being used to test some kind of advanced technology that went catastrophically wrong, causing the train and all its passengers to be destroyed or displaced. The government, unwilling to admit to the experiment or its failure, then covered up all evidence. The problem with this theory is that in 1911, technology was nowhere near advanced enough for the kind of experiments this theory would require.
Theory number 6. The electromagnetic anomaly. A more scientific approach suggests that the tunnel may have experienced an extremely rare electromagnetic phenomenon, perhaps a localized and intense electromagnetic pulse or field distortion. Some researchers have proposed that certain geological conditions, combined with atmospheric factors, could theoretically create electromagnetic anomalies strong enough to affect matter in unusual ways. Could such an anomaly have somehow dematerialized or displaced the train? While this sounds like science fiction, we do know that electromagnetic fields can have strange effects, and we're still learning about the full range of electromagnetic phenomena in nature. Theory number 7. Mass hallucination. A psychological explanation suggests that the witnesses near the tunnel may have experienced some form of mass hallucination or shared delusion. Perhaps there was never a disappearance at all, and the entire event was a product of collective misperception, false memory, or even deliberate fabrication by a small group of individuals. However, this doesn't explain what happened to the train if it did exist and was scheduled to make that journey.
What makes the Italian ghost train particularly fascinating is that it's not an isolated case. Throughout history, there have been other reports of mysterious disappearances involving trains, ships, aircraft, and even entire groups of people. The case bears some resemblance to the legend of the Phantom Train of St. Louis, Saskatchewan, which is said to appear as a glowing light traveling along abandoned railway tracks. There's also the story of the Valencia train in Spain, which allegedly disappeared in the 1960s under similar circumstances. though documentation of this case is also disputed. In more recent times, we've had mysteries like the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 in 2014, an entire commercial aircraft with 239 people aboard that vanished and has never been fully explained despite modern tracking technology. We've had cases of ships found completely abandoned with no signs of the crew, like the Mary Celeste. These modern mysteries remind us that even in our age of satellites, GPS, and constant surveillance, things can still vanish in ways we can't easily explain. Some researchers have attempted to identify patterns in these disappearances. Are certain geographical locations more prone to such events? Do they happen during specific times or under certain atmospheric conditions? Are there electromagnetic or geological factors that link these cases? So far, no definitive patterns have emerged, but the search for connections continues. The Italian ghost train story has inspired numerous books, documentaries, and even fictional works. It's become a staple of paranormal literature and is frequently cited in discussions about unexplained disappearances. Whether the story is true as told, partially true, or entirely legendary, it has captured the imagination of people around the world for over a century. So, perhaps there are forces and phenomena in our universe that we don't yet understand. What do you think happened to the ghost train? Was it a natural disaster, a paranormal event, a government cover-up, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love hearing your theories. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more content exploring the unexplained, the mysterious, and the downright bizarre. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember, the next time you're traveling through a tunnel, on a train, in a car, or on foot, take a moment to think about the Italian ghost train. Think about those 106 souls who entered a tunnel one summer day and never emerged, and wonder, just for a moment, what secrets might be hidden in the darkness. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep questioning everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.